All right. Hello and welcome aboard the Gallant Says podcast. It is 11:33 p.m. Central Time on Monday, March 25th of 2024. I went to my first Houston Rockets game of the season tonight at Toyota Center. They won their ninth straight game, 110-92. Over a very bad Portland Trailblazers team. But it is noteworthy because the Rockets are now one game above 500. And as you take a look at the NBA standings, the Rockets, get this, are half a game back of the Golden State Warriors. Houston's 36-35. Golden State's 36-34. They do, though, have a tiebreaker on the Rockets. Tomorrow, Golden State has a game while the Rockets are off. They are going to play the Miami Heat in Miami. Miami, for those who don't know, the 7th seed currently in the Eastern Conference. Not the Miami that we've seen in years past, but neither are the Warriors. So that'll be an interesting game. And it was, for the Rockets, a strange game from this perspective. Jock Landale was their leading fucking scorer for a while. Jock Landale had 15 points in the first quarter of this game. A quarter where no one on the Rockets could hit a shot to save their life. I think that around or close to halftime, Dillon Brooks, Fred VanVleet, and Jaylen Green were combined 3 for 21. It was a rough start for those three, and that rough start continued for Brooks, for VanVleet. But thanks to some nice contributions from Rockets bench players, Jae'Sean Tate, Aaron Holiday, Landale, as I mentioned before, they hang around just long enough for Jaylen Green to once again flip the switch. Green had 19 second-half points and really seemed to take over in this game in the third quarter, where he hit a three-pointer, then had a steal and goes about 1,000 miles per hour from one end of the court to the next and tops it off with an amazing dunk. He's playing great. I will say, as I've been saying over the last couple of games, that you do have to take everything the Rockets are doing right now with a grain of salt, because they are playing some absolute bums. Portland, no exception. Yeah, the Rockets have played a couple of good teams over this stretch and beaten them. They beat Cleveland, the 3 seed in the East. They beat Chicago, currently the 9 seed in the East. Sacramento, competent team as well. But they've been beating up on some cupcakes, and that's why Wednesday is going to be really exciting. I heard at the post-game press conference, Rockets coach Ime Udoka say this about Jaylen Green. To see him respond the way that he did from the first half to the second, it's a really promising sign. It's, as pointed out by the person who asked the question, Adam Spillane, who does stuff for the Associated Press and Sports Radio 610. This is not traditionally something that Jaylen Green does. Respond well to poor performances in the first half. But this time he did. Again, it's against the Portland Trailblazers. They're starting a bunch of rookies. Yes, Todd, the show. This is live. What's up, Dolphin Soup on YouTube and on Twitch. I think that when it comes down to Green being able to respond like that, you love it, but you want to see it on Wednesday. And Wednesday night, I don't want to put too much stock in one regular season game, but the Thunder, who are currently the 2 seed in the Western Conference, they right now are going to be a damn tough test. After the game, Jaylen Green had some really interesting comments. And I love when young guys are actually honest. They haven't gotten trained up to just give absolute non-answers in the media. But given that we heard Draymond Green, when asked about the surging Rockets, getting closer and closer to them in the Western Conference, acting like he hadn't heard about them, I liked hearing Jaylen Green say, when asked a couple of different questions about just the ever-changing standings in the West and how close they are, he said, teams need to start paying attention. We are paying attention to the standings. And most interestingly, something that perhaps is consistent with private conversations that became unprivate with certain members of Rockets media, I think it's really interesting that Green brought up this, quote, "We're playing a whole different style of basketball." And I know that's going to lend itself to the Rockets, Game of Thrones-esque war, two different houses. House Alperen Şengün, he's injured, he's not playing right now. House Jalen Green, these two sides seem to hate one another. One of them seems to be very largely based in Turkey and perhaps a tad too sensitive to the idea of xenophobia. A proper adjective isn't xenophobic just because it's blended with the word stiff. Spare me with that bullshit. But this is perhaps going to lend itself to, I don't know, the divisive stuff that we've been seeing between Rockets fans. Because the way that they're playing, the fast pace, it's working. They do need to shoot better. And tonight was one of those nights where you're like, okay, I mean, they're not as good at shooting as they've been over the last couple of games, but they are definitely playing a different style. That was the answer that Jaylen Green gave when he was asked if any of the past games against Oklahoma City taught the Rockets anything. So there you go. More comments. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Avi Lieberman. Wow, this is a loaded comment. Hi, Paul. Israel loves the Rockets. The team, not the ones fired at us. Yeah, seems like that's just fucked up all around. Obviously, what the Hamas did at that festival was despicable. And also, at the same time, I feel like we've gotten to a point now where Israel maybe has taken their pound of flesh. I saw this really fucked up video from Al Jazeera showing drone strikes, kind of like a kid in a backyard playing with one of those like spy glasses and lasering ants, like taking out a couple of just Palestinians who seemed to be walking down rubble. I don't know if they were armed or what, but it was fucking, didn't look like they were. And they just got the absolute smithereens blown out of them. That's awful. So there you go. Paul Gallant checks in on Israel and Palestine. You're welcome for that. I want to have more takes on what I saw in tonight's game. It was nice to see the Rockets crowd actually being fairly full in the middle of a March game. They honored Jamal Shed. They honored Juwan Roberts as well from the Cougs in the middle of this game. But it was a lively atmosphere as the game went along, and especially as Jaylen Green took the game over. Very good to see him continue to do this, and especially to respond after what I thought was a really bad first half by him. Bad first half by all the Rockets starters, but they bounce back. They get the win, and what they've been doing has sure been a whole lot of fun. All right, more stuff I wanted to dive into, and I know that most people aren't here generally for my Houston Rockets takes. You're here more often than not for thoughts that I have on the Houston Texans because you listened to me on the flagship station for all those years, 2011 to 2019, and because football is just my favorite sport. The Houston Texans did sign a guy. They signed Miles Bryant, who was a 5'9" corner. I looked this up on Wikipedia, and I'm assuming that he has grown since then. But at the NFL Combine in 2020, he measured at 5'7" and 7/8. He played for the Patriots. I'll be honest, I haven't watched as much Patriots football over the last couple of years, but I don't really feel bad about it given how shitty they've been. Undrafted Washington player, 200 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, 17 passes deflected, and 4 interceptions. not the kind of guy that you look at and say he's going to be competing for the starting cornerback position opposite Derek Stingley Jr. He's a small little guy. More of those, nickelback types. And it seems like the Texans have a lot of guys like that. Desmond King, you kind of throw Jalen Petrie up there from time to time. You throw Jimmy Ward up there from time to time. Obviously, those two are safeties, but you get what I'm trying to say. They didn't bring in, I think, serious competition at cornerback. So makes some of the stuff that we heard from DeMeco Ryans at the NFL owners meetings today, I think fit pretty interesting. Shout out to Cody Stutes. I think Aaron Wilson, the only two people from Houston sports media down there. And look, who would have thought that this week would be as busy as it's been with obviously the Astros opening things up on Thursday. We're going to do another late night episode after the opening day. But also you had the Cougs advancing onto the Sweet 16 against Duke, and the Rockets are actually relevant right now. So maybe less people go into those NFL owners meetings. But Ryan's brought up the signings of Jeffrey Okudah, the former top 10 pick, third overall in the 2020 draft at corner by the Detroit Lions, and C.J. Henderson, the ninth overall pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And he says he doesn't care about where they were drafted. He likes their length, their sticky coverage, and the competition that is now at the position because you bring those two guys in. And okay, you got a bit of a battle to the death between these two. But man, one of these guys really has to work out. One of them has to. If you're just going to stand pat and not bring Steven Nelson back, which seems like is going to be the case unless there's some sort of hardball going on, the Texans give him an offer and he's just hoping that somebody else is going to offer him a little bit more. I don't like going into the year with two guys that have been on now 3 teams in 4 years. I don't really like the idea of having a competition between those two. I don't. I like that DeMeco Ryans is going to give the most positive spin that he can on that. They're long, they're sticky in coverage, blah, 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 blah. But I haven't seen it, and I feel like this could be yet again another example of the Houston Texans overreacting to what they saw on film from a couple of guys who were once highly touted coming out of the NFL draft, and their performances against the Texans maybe were noteworthy. Honestly, I'm not going to go back and watch the all fucking 22 of Jeffrey Okudah and C.J. Henderson against the Texans with the Falcons and with the Panthers respectively, but those two did play against the Texans this year. More comments. Sammy Escain comments, your clip you posted about Jack Easterby and the Aggies was funny. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you. The Golan and George radio program, everybody, noon to 3 weekdays on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 with some YouTube clips after the fact placed on YouTube at Paul Gallant. So there you go. Todd the Show says he's here for the Houston Texans take. Making treasure out of trash is possible. Were they already on bad teams? Yeah, the most recent teams that they were on were certainly not playoff contenders. Okudah was in Detroit when Detroit wasn't good, and C.J. Henderson was on the Jaguars when the Jaguars, I believe, had Urban Meyer. So, yeah, it's possible that those guys have just been in shit situations with shit schemes around them. So maybe DeMeco Ryans can make it work. I'm not ruling it out. I feel like it can't assume that DeMeco Ryans is going to touch every single player that he brings in and turn that guy into the player he was supposed to be in the NFL draft, you know? Todd the Show on YouTube comments, being on a good team with an upside could change his trajectory. No doubt about it. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying I don't think you should expect it either. I think you should. Maybe this is my own negative line of thinking, and DeMeco Ryans would say, like, you're a bad vibe. You got to get off my team. But I generally expect the worst. You know, with a young quarterback, we put such high expectations on them, these guys that are drafted early on. J.J. McCarthy, all of a sudden, with the story today, because of his pro day, the Michigan quarterback has gone from being the 5th quarterback on the board in terms of odds to be drafted 2nd overall to now he's the favorite to be taken 2nd overall. What? Because Jim Harbaugh said that this is the greatest pro day performance I've ever seen. Jesus, how many obnoxious pro day overreactions have we seen? Remember Zach Wilson and Johnny Manziel, all that bullshit? Ugh. So I don't know why that happened, but we put so much pressure on these young quarterbacks, and I think what we should really do is say, well, he's probably not the guy. You go into it with that line of thinking, you're not going to marry yourself to some young prospect that maybe isn't the guy, but you try to tell yourself he is. I don't know, Justin Fields in Chicago, Daniel Jones with the Giants. You see a guy like that, and you're like, well, I see some things, and maybe he can be a little bit more consistent, but you don't usually have a question answered as easily as you do with CJ Stroud. And look, the Texans struck gold here. They got absolutely lucky, no matter what they want to say about who they had as their number one quarterback on the board. The fact that Stroud fell into their lap and that Stroud has taken off the way that he has to open up his career is fucking incredible. And I'm so thankful that I'm here for this. You don't think that you're going to see a couple of young quarterbacks come into the league and thrive right away. And you saw that with Deshaun Watson, but you're really seeing it with CJ Stroud. So we'll see what happens in year 2. More from DeMeco Ryans at the NFL owners meetings. And again, shout out to Cody Stutes for getting all this. He expects Tank Dell to be ready for the offseason workouts. I have a question for Texans fans, and there's a post that will be coming on my YouTube channel at Paul Gallant from the radio show that I do with Joe George. It was about a couple of different things, but specifically the idea that I don't think a lot of Texans fans are willing to say it aloud, but I think a lot of them are very skeptical about Tank Dell and his ability to be healthy on a game-to-game basis. I feel like a lot of people are like, yeah, I don't think he's going to play 17 games. If that's the reason that you want the Texans to go after that fancy wide receiver, whether in the draft or just trading for one of the big names available, that makes a lot more sense than some of the explanations that you guys have been giving me. Because a lot of the explanations have been, well, you got to give CJ Stroud as many weapons as he possibly can have. No, here's the reason that you get a great quarterback. It's so that you can allocate your resources elsewhere. He's going to raise the level of play of the wide receivers around him. Nico Collins and Tank Dell is a pretty damn good 1-2 combination. Noah Brown's a pretty damn good number 3 wide receiver. Could you do better? Of course you could. You could also do a lot worse at your number 3 wide receiver. You could do a lot worse at your number 1 and 2 wide receivers. You got 2 good wide receivers. So if you're telling me that you don't think Tank Dell, with the frame that he has, is going to be able to last many NFL seasons, that is something I will actually listen to. But if you're just asking to get more and more weapons, you're fucking greedy. One of the things that I learned growing up watching Tom Brady is that, guess what? The quarterback is going to elevate the receivers around him. You do not necessarily need to have the best receivers in the NFL to be successful in this league. If you got a good enough quarterback, he can make it work. Now, you also need to have a good defense to win a championship, but hey, what did the Kansas City Chiefs just do? Look at Mahomes, look at Brady. That's the standard that you actually can hold CJ Stroud to right now, even if it's unlikely that he becomes either of those two guys. More comments from DeMeco Ryans from the NFL owners meetings. The reason that the Texans traded out of the first round is because they felt there's lots of guys in the second and third round of the draft that they could take that would help them. That's very consistent with, I think, what most people thought was the reason for them trading out. You get a second-round pick next year as well. Hopefully it's an early second-round pick because you're assuming that the Vikings are going to be in a rather messy quarterback situation going into next year, though now they do have 2 first-round picks to potentially move up and get a guy. But if all these quarterbacks are gone, the top 4 picks, man, they might have to give up even more just to get to that spot, to get second, third best quarterback available. More from DeMeco Ryans at the NFL owners meetings. He said it's cool that guys want to play for the Texans, but he wants them to know that they're going to have to work and that the Texans have to see them as a fit. All obvious statements, but important to hear that with all the people that are like, why aren't they signing Xavier Howard? Xavier Howard most recently had a $75 million contract, and you think that guy's going to take a pay cut? I think a lot of people get it a little bit twisted with the idea of a player not wanting to take that money to play for a contender versus a player wanting to play for a contender, but a player who has recently been paid. There's an ego check that needs to happen for a guy to even consider taking less than what he believes he is worth on the open market. And Xavier Howard getting That's $75 million. I don't give a shit if he's got a Texans tattoo on him somewhere. You've been paid that kind of money. You're going to look for that kind of money. Maybe you're not looking for the top of the top dollar, but I'm rather skeptical of the Texans' interest in Xavier Howard. I'm sure that Miami has probably been putting some things out there about like, oh, he's a bad teammate, blah, 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 blah. I know a lot of his teammates were standing up for him, specifically Jalen Ramsey. What the truth is, I actually do not know, but it is cool to see a bunch of players saying publicly that they'd want to play for the Houston Texans. I just think you also got to remember, Nick Caserio is going to have to want to pay him. And on top of that, they're going to have to be a fit. And I will say, as far as vibes went this past season, the vibes were pretty damn close to immaculate with DeMeco Ryans running the show. Xavier Howard is that somebody who would come in here and mesh with a lot of hungry guys who are all trying to prove themselves? I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. DeMeco is very pumped about DeMeco Autry, the defensive lineman that they got from the Tennessee Titans, said they can use him multiple ways. Is going to vary week to week to stress opposing offenses. He says he's a great player and has the respect of not only offensive linemen, but defensive linemen across the league. So how about that? Todd the Show comments, and this is about Lance Zierlein, saying, Lance seems really down on Tank. I got to hear what Lance has to say about Tank. He continues saying, I like Tank, but he watches more football than me. I wonder what it is that he has been saying about Tank Dell specifically. I wanted to read some comments from a rival coach of the Houston Texans because it made me chuckle a little bit. This is Doug Peterson, head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, also at the NFL owners meetings, in a conversation with Michael DeRocco of ESPN.com. Quote, I guess now we're going back to the hunter again, right? End quote. Referring to the Jaguars going from being the hunted to hunters. I mean, they got the shit hounded out of them down the stretch last year. The Buffalo, Dodo Birds, losing 5 of 6 down the stretch when they had, at one point, after beating the Houston Texans, an 8-3 record is an all-time collapse. And I know a lot of people love what Doug Peterson did with the Philadelphia Eagles. Interestingly, the Eagles fired him after that. And I also know that a lot of people think that Doug Peterson with Trevor Lawrence was going to get more out of Trevor Lawrence than Urban Meyer ever could, and that Urban Meyer was perhaps a net negative on the development of Trevor Lawrence. But I think a lot of people have made a lot of excuses for Trevor Lawrence to this point in his career. And I don't think that the Jacksonville Jaguars ever should have been considered a hunted team outside of the AFC South. I have never taken them seriously during the Trevor Lawrence era. And it's so strange to me that so many people wanted to get down on their knees. And you know what? The Jaguars, after they won a game where Trevor Lawrence threw 4 interceptions in the first quarter, Lawrence turns the football over a lot. He fumbles the football. He'll put some bad throws out there. He sails passes. He is a quarterback that has a lot of talent. He can move. He can extend plays. But he's got a strong arm. But there are things that, in my opinion, that are left to be desired. And if you watch the last Texans-Jaguars game this season, I felt like a lot of the statistics he put up that had a lot of Jaguars fans pitching pants tents, I think a lot of those numbers were the byproduct of yards after the catch and broken plays. I thought that C.J. Stroud was clearly the better quarterback just from watching the two in that game. You're going to call me biased, whatever. I don't care. I just feel pretty confident knowing that C.J. Stroud's better than Trevor Lawrence. So hearing Peterson say, I guess now we're going back to the hunter again, right, kind of shows a sense of arrogance that the Jaguars probably had about themselves last season. Here's the quote continued. Quote, This is the culture I want to establish in Jacksonville, and this is the reason why you go get guys like Mitch Morse, center from the from the Bills, Eric Armstead, who was a defensive tackle with the 49ers, Darnell Savage, and guys that have been to the postseason. I want to say Savage was most recently with the Green Bay Packers, 2019 first-round pick. Yep, he was with the Packers until just last year. Guys that have been to the postseason, these guys have been captains on their teams, and they've been to Super Bowls. They've been to AFC Championship games. So these guys know how to win, and that's the kind of influx of talent that we want to bring onto our roster. Guys who have been there, done that. Okay, you want guys who have been there and done that if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars. But at the same time, is a safety, a defensive tackle, and a center, are they going to make the Jaguars take things a little bit more seriously? And were the Jaguars taking things so unseriously? That was the reason that they had the kind of struggles that they did down the stretch? Because I more so just think that the Jaguars got exposed last year. And I don't know that 3 veteran players, 2 of them, Armstead, Morse, are up there in age. I don't know that that's going to help fix an offense that lost Calvin Ridley to the Tennessee Titans, an offense that scored 7 points against the Ravens December 17th, 12 points against the Buccaneers December 24th, and just 20 points against the Titans with nothing to play for in the last week of the year. I don't 3 points against the 49ers a little bit earlier, 9 points against the Kansas City Chiefs the second week of the year. Like, they get punched in the mouth by good defenses. A center's going to help that. You need more weapons for Lawrence because Lawrence isn't on the same level as C.J. Stroud. So it's a cute quote, like Doug Peterson saying, guess we're now back to being the hunter again. But I just don't take the Jaguars seriously as a hunter. Maybe in the AFC South, I'd say, well, they could be the Texans' number 1 competition to win the division, but it's the Colts. The Colts are a better team. The Colts are better run. The Colts might have a better coach in Shane Steichen than Doug Peterson. We are going off of 1 year, but I look at the Jaguars and that quote by Doug Peterson, like that is 100% something that I would love to say. Shut the fuck up. Like, we're back to being the hunter again. It's like you're patting yourself on the back for at one point being hunted, but no one was seriously hunting you, you know? No one was actually going after you because no one really cared that much. And you blew an 8-3 lead, you know, an 8-3 record. You blew a multi-game lead in the AFC South. You had the Texans dead in the water when it came to that division, and you just completely blew it. Let's read some comments here. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Trevor was anointed being Jesus 1.5 years before he was even drafted. They're doing the same thing to Caleb Williams this year. They gave him the number 1 pick last year. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I do think that we have perhaps pumped Caleb Williams' tires a little bit too much. That's not to say that I think Caleb Williams is going to be a failure. Generally, I've gotten to the point now where I don't even watch the film of these quarterbacks. I watch them play in college games on Saturdays, usually while drinking with friends. But the idea that anyone knows a thing about quarterbacks going into the draft, it has been just exposed as hilariously wrong. And yet, the NFL media draft industrial complex has just gotten out of fucking control. Everyone's got an opinion now on these quarterbacks coming out, and those are the people that actually watch. Then you got other people that have opinions, and I've come to learn that if I have an opinion on some of these quarterbacks, it might be from actually having watched a couple of games, but for the most part, I don't know a fucking thing. I thought, but didn't really go all in with this, that C.J. Stroud losing those 2 games to Michigan was not exactly ideal. But then you saw him play in the college football playoff against Georgia, and you're like, oh, fuck yeah, this is awesome. But we've seen other quarterbacks play great in the college football playoff. Tua Tagovailoa had some good moments there. What do we think of Tua Tagovailoa now? If you're the Dolphins, that's a tricky situation to be in. He's a top 15 quarterback, that's for sure, and statistically he's great. But like, where do you actually rank him? Kind of seems to vary week to week, especially if he's been, you know, smashed in the head or something like that. So, yeah, I don't think they should be pumping those tires up. Anyway, Todd the show with one last comment. I usually don't care about this division, the AFC South, but I feel like this is the most equal and fun to watch it's been in a while. I agree with you there. I think it's going to be a competitive division going into the year. I think the Titans have been surprisingly aggressive. Really, Will Levis from year 1 to year 2, that's going to determine a lot, but they brought in Calvin Ridley. The Colts, they played really well last year, and they were missing Anthony Richardson much of the year. I feel like Joe Flacco will be more accurate than Gardner Minshew was in that game that, honestly, the Colts should have won, the last game of the year. Like that Colts game, man, they really blew it. They had so many opportunities, and the Texans just couldn't put them away for whatever reason. But, you know, that drop that they had on 4th and 1 where they wouldn't put Jonathan Taylor on the field, but they had Taylor on the field for every play before that on the drive. I'm still flabbergasted by that. Bad move by Steichen there, but if I'm powering in the AFC South going into this year, right now, again, March now 26, 2024, number 1, Texans, number 2, Colts, number 3, Jaguars, number 4, Titans. It is very competitive, though. And that's nice because there have been some years where it was fucking watching. It was like watching Pride and Prejudice. It was like reading Pride and Prejudice. God, that movie. I remember one year, summer vacation, we had assigned reading. We had to read Pride and Prejudice. I read like 20 pages. I'm like, this is so fucking dumb. What the fuck is this? So I decided to watch the movie. Little did I know the movie was 4 hours. Also, sucked. And there you go. And I would rather watch that than the AFC South games that we once had to watch when the Texans were really running the AFC South in the not too distant past. Anyway, I'm falling asleep. Thank you for tuning in. Try to do another one of these after tomorrow's radio show. It really depends on the energy, the time that I have. But thank everybody for joining. If you haven't already, please like this video. Subscribe on YouTube. Maybe you're a Twitcher. Do the same thing on Twitch. You can also get this wherever you get your podcasts after the fact. We're still trying to figure out if we want to do something where we post the best clips from this live stream show to a podcast, or if we just post this straight as the podcast, because I think some people don't want to have their feeds cluttered, and I think I want to put my best material on them. So still working on that, but Apple and Spotify look for the Gallant Says podcast. Give it a 5-star rating. Give it a nice little review. Tell a friend. Every little bit helps. Anyway, until tomorrow, noon on ESPN Radio, 97.5 and 92.5 here in Houston. I am merely Paul Gallant. So long, farewell. Have yourselves a wonderful Tuesday morning.